this up in my headphones, Charles?
Turning it up. Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we have taken to social media to recruit book recommendations, and we've done book recommendations in the past for fans of the First Law trilogy, for fans of Brandon Sanderson, for fans of Mark Lawrence, but this is a special one that, Dylan, you've worked long and hard on, right, Dylan?
Yes. I don't think we've done... Have we done book recommendations for fans of Mark Lawrence? I don't think we've done that.
Oh, well, put that one on the episode ideas.
Sure. We'll definitely put that on the episode ideas because I'd love to bring that to y'all. But to answer your question, Charles, yes, I was hard at work. It was a while ago at this point. Asking people to help me and help one of our friends and loyal listeners, Tony the Fong, the Fong of Emberlane on Twitter, who has this mission that is hashtag mission make Charles cry. And you, Charles, you have never cried from a fantasy novel to our knowledge. There was a point where when we read The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, you either had allergies or like you felt something in your eye, something like that happened. But that was our first real attempt to try to make you cry from fantasy literature or fantasy content in general. And then, Tony considered it something of a win that I guess that some sort of tears came.
There was a misty eye situation going on, maybe even a single tear. It was very emotional. It was a fantastic short story, very emotionally powerful. Yes. But yeah, your reaction was different from mine, and you were kind of surprised by my lack of sobbing to that one, although I was very emotional, and I feel like a lot of people on Twitter felt the same way when they found out.
Yes, they felt the same way in terms of their surprise that you did not cry.
So I don't know how to take this. In one way, I'm flattered that there's so many people out there who are interested in the show and us as individuals, but I'm also concerned that people think of me as some kind of like sociopathic, not capable of feeling, kind of podcast host here. So that's when I was like, let's take it to Twitter. What are these books that everyone's crying over, and let's see if there's any that I've read and can react to, or maybe some good recommendations out there that we could pick up to invoke this emotion. Because guys, look, I want to cry just as much as you guys want me to. For an author to write something that gives you an emotion powerful enough to make you cry is a huge achievement and a rare achievement. And I feel like there's no
rarer
honor.
For some than it is for others.
Rarer for some more than others, for sure.
Yes.
So I'm excited to get into it and hear what people got. Paper Menagerie for me is a fantastic submission. That one was really great, got really close, depending on how you define crying. Maybe I already did.
If we have to have a conversation about the definition of cry, I mean, Tony considered it a win, so I'll let Tony have that, but I'll say once you're starting to debate whether or not it's crying, for me, I'm like, okay, did you really cry? So we're here to see what kind of book recommendations folks from Twitter have for you, Charles, to try to make you cry. And we'll see. I mean, at least these will be in our headspace now and things for me to draw from. I'm a chronic crier when it comes to fantasy books and just like media in general. I mean, if something hits me in the feels, I will start crying pretty quick. So even looking down this list, a bunch of these have made me cry, and we'll see if any of these end up getting through to you, some of which I know you have read, and other ones we're going to read, and other ones maybe I can start pitching a little bit to you if I've read them.
All right, let's do it. Where do we start?
I think we start at the beginning of this notes sheet.
Fantastic.
Which, yes. And this first recommendation is from @BefuddledPanda, who is a member of the Green Team over at the Green Team podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for the Make Charles Cry recommendation. Let's see what they got.
Yeah, well, they've made me cry with a recommendation already that I read, which is Never Let Me Go, which is it's not, I wouldn't call it fantasy, but
it sounds sad if I'm
speculative fiction.
It's already kind of emotional. Sounding.
Yeah, but that's not this though that would be one of Dylan's recommendations for Make Charles Cry. So maybe I can get you on board with that one as well. But yeah, so I got that one from Green Team Podcast. But anyway, here it was from a different host for the record. But here's Befuddled Panda, who recommended the Murderbot Diaries, Charles. Yeah, and said it's sci-fi, but the Murderbot Diaries may get through to Charles. There are moments in the series where my eyes leaked a little. And yes,
I see.
That's
Robot
well played.
Joke there. Interesting.
Yep.
So this is interesting because we are actually currently reading All Systems Red, which is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries, right, Dylan? The Diaries is the series, and we're reading it for a buddy read episode that we are going to drop very soon, featuring fiction fans, our good buddies over there. And
yeah,
now, Dylan, my question is All Systems Red on its own emotional, or do we have to read multiple books?
I think that when I think about the ways in which first of all, I've only read All Systems Red. I have not read beyond that in the Murderbot Diaries. So I would say if All Systems Red is emotional for someone, it's because of their deep connection that they feel to Murderbot, our main character. And it's like Murderbot is just so relatable, as it's almost, I don't think they would use the word cyborg, but that's kind of what they are. Like has organic and non-organic parts, and the organic parts can have actual feelings and things like that, while the non-organic, like metal parts, are kind of this exterior that Murderbot has. And it's interesting to watch Murderbot grapple with this idea that they're like part human and have some of these reactions, but also part robot, and they struggle with some of these things like social anxiety and the difficulty with interpersonal relationships and interactions, and and feeling different from other people, which makes sense when you're a Murderbot. And so, it's I think it might. So yeah, I'm trying to answer your question, Charles. I don't think there's like this moment. So the Paper Menagerie has a moment, right, where you're like, oh, like, did you cry during that moment? I won't say what. The Murderbot Diaries, for me, doesn't have a moment that's like the tear-jerking moment, but it's very emotional throughout in terms of like you can relate, or some people, including me, can relate to the plight of Murderbot, and Patrick Rothfuss could really relate too.
I can see that because I'm about halfway through All Systems Red, and Dylan, I'm not crying. I'm actually kind of chuckling as I go along in this, because this idea of a robot that is only just trying to do the bare minimum of their job and doesn't want to interact with people.
I knew that's what you would gravitate
toward
like, too.
It's kind of funny, but I'm only about halfway through. I don't know. You don't.
I'm about.
Did you cry to read All Systems? Did you cry when you read All Systems Red for the first time? Because you've read it before.
Yes, I don't think I cried during the first time. I have these moments when I read All Systems Red that I kind of get like pangs of sadness, like a feeling behind my eyes or something like that. But I don't think I've cried. Not you, Charles, with the allergies. Like, I don't think I've ever had tears come up for Murderbot. And I've only read All Systems Red.
Maybe it gets sadder as we go through all the diaries.
Yeah, when I get these like moments of connection with Murderbot where I'm like, oh, that's so real, and it hits me kind of in the heart, in the feels, Charles. But I don't think I've cried from it, and maybe there's moments that come later on past All Systems Red that might be like the real tear-jerking moments. So I hope we get. We're only doing All Systems Red right now, but I really hope we get further along in the series to see those moments. I do think Befuddled Panda, we've had exchanges on Twitter before that suggest to me that they have read, if not all of them, definitely like well past All Systems Red.
Befuddled
So,
Panda's
yeah.
recommendation was the series, not
Yes.
specifically All Systems Red.
Right.
So that's, I think, an important distinction to make. Well, great. Well, we have a lot to say about Murderbot Diaries, which we will say in a later episode. But for now, Befuddled Panda, thank you for the recommendation. And I will come back to this when we do the whole buddy
Yes.
read and I finish the book, because I'm
Ooh.
about halfway through now. And I'll tell you, I'm chuckling. I'm not crying. But maybe that will change. We will see.
Do you get? Well, okay. We'll put a pin in this.
If
We'll
you
put a
want to
pin-
talk
yeah.
more about Murderbot,
We'll have
check
plenty
us
of-
out
yes.
later in the week, because we are going to be releasing a All Systems Red episode very soon.
With Fiction Fans Podcast.
Great
and
segue.
it just so happens that the next comment comes from at Fiction Fans Pod, which is Sarah. It's Sarah and Lily, our Fiction Fans podcast, and they do absolutely awesome stuff over there. Highly recommend checking them out if you haven't gotten the chance yet. But Sarah does kind of the equivalent of what I do, which is like all the social media side of their podcast. So anyway, they say, or Sarah says, really, honestly, the only thing that's coming to mind right now is The Place Promised in Our Early Days and Voices of a Distant Star, which are both movies and not books. Gorgeously animated and incredibly poignant. And Early Days has my favorite soundtrack ever. So, Charles, have you seen? I have not. Have you seen either of these movies?
I've never heard of these movies before. I'm
Well-
I'm doing a quick Google search. Yeah, I love animated movies. I love animation, so it's already got my interest there. So my interest is piqued. Voices
Okay.
of a Distant Star. Never heard of it.
Well, consider Charles's interest peaked, but his eyes dry at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a little exchange with Sarah after this where about some movies. I was bawling when I watched oh my god, I'm blanking on the name to it right now. But oh man.
Which book? Which movie is it?
It's a movie with Bridge to Terabithia. Oh, jeez. That was a close moment there, Charles. That was like, because we don't do a lot of this, like, editing out the parts where we make mistakes. We just do it. So that was going to be this moment, because I didn't write anything down. I was like, oh, no.
Bridge to Terabithia is sad.
Bridge
yeah.
to Terabithia. Have you seen that one? That was movie-wise.
Yeah, I saw that when
that's
it came out years and years ago. I don't
You were
remember.
like a kid, probably.
Yeah, I was.
Did you
much
cry?
younger. Probably in
Ooh.
2007. So yeah, that was quite a while ago. I was quite young. I saw it in the theaters. Yeah, that's a sad one. It gets into some really dramatic stuff. So that's
Yeah.
a great recommendation for a movie. Absolutely.
Do you think that so Sarah went the route of movies here, and by the way, I think Sarah had read the Bridge of Terabithia book, if I'm correct, and I think she
I've never
found
read
it
it.
to be very poignant as well. But I think, yeah, I haven't read the Bridge of Terabithia book either. But a topic of interest, Charles, that maybe we won't get into in depth in our Rex episode is like, do you think movies would have a better chance than books to make you cry? Or
Oh
equal?
yeah, for sure, because of the music and
Yeah,
like,
soundtrack.
The soundtrack can evoke so much emotion, and especially for me. So if you play like a really sad song and show someone, doing something really sad, it's way more likely for sure. I was thinking of other books that had invoked an emotional response for me. And I was looking at my library, and there was only one that I could really say was another honorable mention. And that's because it was also a really famous movie that I have not seen, but it's Blue is the Warmest Color by Julie Moreau. And this is actually a graphic novel. She both wrote and illustrated it.
Wow.
And she's
Ooh,
incredibly...
he's holding it up right now.
I'm holding
for
it
the
up. I had it
listeners,
on
and
my desk.
Looks
It's a short...
very interesting.
It's a short graphic novel. It's like 150 pages, so you could read it in like an hour. but it's like I think it's
Ooh.
like a really long movie. It's like over 2 hours long, and
Interesting.
it won Cannes Film Festival and all that. So it was really artsy, but it's about a relationship, and
Mm.
it basically it would be my recommendation for if you liked Paper Menagerie, because
Mm.
you said, Dylan, that it has that moment in it.
Yes.
This has a moment in it as well where it's like, okay, this is the sad part, people. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, so if you like that where there's a sad moment that's happening and you're reading it and you're feeling emotional from it, it's kind of like the payoff of the whole thing. This has that. And the illustration's really, really interesting as well. The way they use color, it's obviously called blue is the warmest color, so that should get you thinking of the potential for art style here. But yeah, just wanted to throw that
Yes.
out there as my honorable mention. It's not a fantasy book per se. It's even less fantasy than Paper Menagerie is, but I wanted to throw it out there. Highly recommend. Blue is the warmest color, Julie Moreau. Never seen the movie, but people really love that movie. There's some controversy maybe around it because it's like a sexually charged movie. It's about relationships and sexuality and things like that. So
Gotcha.
I think that's what kind of propelled it at the time it came out. So if that sounds interesting to you, highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah. No, that sounds awesome. I definitely want to check that out. And we even got a book rec from Charles for book recommendations to make Charles
Yeah,
cry. So.
it was very similar to Paper Menagerie. We're like, oh man, this is so sad.
Did you have allergies during it?
Maybe.
Ooh. All right. Well, that is honorable mention from Charles.
Honorable mention.
I definitely want to check it out.
Sure.
And yeah, we've got a longtime listener and friend in Benjamin, who's a reviewer at Literature and Lo-Fi, and he recommended. I think he's got some Charles-like tendencies. I think in the sense that he was like. I think he was saying he hadn't really cried at anything. I could be wrong. Sorry, Benjamin, if I'm wrong on that. But your tweet starts with "the nearest" was "Never Die" and "Pawn's Gambit" by Rob Hayes. He tagged at Rob of the Hayes, and that Spiffbo winner. That's a self-published fantasy blog office, Spiffbo, run by friend of the show Mark Lawrence.
Yes.
So that's an extremely high honor to win Spiffbo. So that should tell you a lot about Rob Hayes' work, which we haven't gotten the chance to check out yet. So Benjamin goes on to say, but I was interested in the characters' house in the cerulean. Oh, sorry, that's like a separate sentence. I'm going to start over. The nearest was Never Die and Pawn's Gambit by Rob Hayes, but I was interested in the characters. House in the Cerulean Sea is a heartwarming story, which may make people cry with happiness. Charles,
interesting.
how do you feel about that? Cry with happiness. Has that ever happened to you before? And do you think it's possible?
Cry with happiness? I mean, anything's possible, but that's not typically what I do when I get really happy. So I don't.
It's not typically
know.
what you do, period. So
yeah.
Let's be honest.
And from a book, that seems really challenging, but it's anything's possible. You've definitely got my interest piqued, Benjamin.
Yeah.
House in the Cerulean Sea.
And I think I was having a conversation earlier on Twitter with this next Twitter user, Yellow Birdie, at YellowBirdie721, about that book, House in the Cerulean Sea. Yeah, and same kind of thing. I've seen lots of people talk about this book through that same lens. I haven't read that book, but this kind of like it's heartwarming, and people have very strong emotional reactions to House in the Cerulean Sea, and it's not from this like it crushes your soul. It's from this like it just hits you in the feels, which is in some ways even more impressive to make people like cry from happiness. It's a lot harder to make people cry from happiness than it is to make them cry from sadness, I think. But that being said, I think the book that Yellow Birdie recommended it is Sword of Kagan, which, from what I've gathered, a book that makes people more cry from sadness. And Yellow Birdie said, Sword of Kagan, it's a family drama set during wartime. Very tragic events that still hurt long after because of the raw emotions. Also, lots of magic and amazing fight scenes in between. And we have more on this one,
Well,
Charles, because friend of the show and Spiffbo finalist Levi
oh,
Jacobs,
great.
who we interviewed way back, and is just a
Levi.
buddy of ours that we'll have on again. I imagine,
Hopefully, yeah.
and yeah, Levi at IR Levi Jacobs seconded Sword of Kagan by saying. There is a reason this one won the biggest indie fantasy contest last year because no one could stop weeping. And I
Wow.
immediately, after Yellow Birdie and Levi said all these things about it, I immediately bought this book. So I now have
Oh,
it on
that's
my Kindle.
awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So I will be I will be getting into this at some point. I don't know when, but I've put myself in the position where I own it at least.
Yeah,
And I'm
sort
very
of key.
interested in this. It
Sort of
sounds
key.
right up my alley. I feel like there's the like family drama and interpersonal relationships and tragedy. I've also heard it pitched as having elements of Avatar The Last Airbender type magic system.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and hitting that with more adult themes and notes and things like that. So it's yeah, I very highly endorsed and
Yeah, how
yeah,
could
this
you not? I mean, yeah, from Levi too. That's great. All right,
yeah,
that's sort of Kagan. I'm interested.
yeah. And let me I we probably a good idea to say the author, M.L. Wong.
M.L. Wong. Cool. Sword of
Yeah.
Kagan. Oh, a Theonite War Story by M.L. Wong. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's
All right.
it's always exciting when you just, somehow these recommendations just come together. I love doing these because now I'm just excited about these new books that weren't even on my radar before. Like I never knew this existed. But Spiffbo finalist winner and highly recommended by Levi, saying no one could stop weeping. Yellow Birdie dropping it as well. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
How could you not?
Yeah. It's hard not to. So and I could not resist. That's
That's true. That
I
adds a whole nother
yeah.
layer.
Yes. And by the way, Yellow Birdie has a Discord that I am a member in. So
Oh,
yeah, shout out to the Discord and to Yellow
shout
Birdie.
out.
So yeah, that's a great one. I really want to get into that as soon as I can. So shall we keep it rolling here,
Let's go.
Charles? All right. Well, we're getting one here from our friend Nils over at the Fantasy Hive, and that's her personal account is at Nils Reviews It,
Mhm.
and these were not surprising recommendations, knowing Nils' taste. She recommended Stormlight Archives by the great Brandon Sanderson, and she also recommended anything by John Gwynn and said, these two authors have made me cry the most. Yeah.
So,
And
Dylan, is Storm? You've read most of what's been published from Stormlight Archives.
yes.
Have you been emotional at any point?
Yes.
Oh,
And this is interesting. I think I had an exchange with Nils after this that was along these lines too, which was when she said that, I was like, wait, did that make me cry? And the thing that stuck out to me was I think it is one of the characters Dalinar's first chapter, like first point of view chapter for this character, who's
mhm.
I think my favorite character in the Stormlight Archive, uh, is just it was so epic and awe-inducing and like it was like a like an amazing short story of character arc in just a single chapter in this giant Stormlight Archive book, The Way of Kings, and it just induced so much awe to me, and I was like reading it in a diner many years ago, and just like getting through this chapter, and I do think I might have just started crying, like in the middle of this diner, just reading this book. And I was like not ready for it. It was just like, oh, just like, because the scene is not tragic. It is more like this, and it's not even like happiness. It was just like, this is so awesome that just like tears started coming out of my eyes.
That's fantastic.
So like yeah, so it was not the typical way that it was not how Paper Menagerie made me cry. It was a totally other thing. It was just, it's so epic, and that's like, leave it to Brandon Sanderson to make you cry from just something being sheer epicness. I want to say more about like the John Gwynn stuff, but yeah, Charles, reactions. Are you crying?
I'm feeling some stuff right now, man. I mean, high praise has always been said about Stormlight Archives. I've gone on record as it's one of the biggest gaps in my reading experience as a fantasy podcaster. It's like I feel like Stormlight's one of those big gaps that I just need to read, because so many people have recommended it for multiple different recommendation series, and so many of our peers have done lots of great content about it. And it seems to be that Brandon Sanderson continues to improve with his work, and so much of what I've read from him is like his older work, that to see where he is now, it doesn't seem possible. But the way the guy approaches writing and studies it and just keeps putting those reps in, publishing book after book, I'm excited to see like where he's ended up now. I'm sure it's incredible, and I'm really excited to get into it one of these days. It's just such a huge investment for us. Like if we decide to read it on the show, it's like a huge commitment. So we're just trying to get our schedule ready for that. But it's got my attention.
It's good that it has your attention, Charles, because it's incredible. And I mean, like you're saying, I feel like Sanderson has come such a long way, and he's had a great starting place with Elantris and then Mistborn and all these, and of course the Wheel of Time books, though I haven't read those
final
books
ones
yet. Yeah, the final ones. I've read the first 3, which were just Robert Jordan. But yeah, what he's doing now is even better, I think. And Stormlight Archive we've used the phrase magnum opus to describe that one. And we also have talked a little bit about Skyward that I'm reading right now. And Skyward had me like that kind of tears in your eyes moment, the misty eyed, like you'd say, Charles. No pun intended around Mistborn or anything. The misty-eyed feeling from just the prologue of Skyward. I'm not done with it yet. We'll see if it has a real emotional ending, because I'm on the verge with that one. I really connect with the main character, Spence, in that. So Sanderson, a great recommendation for trying to get anyone to cry, I think, Charles included. So, yes. And
That's
Charles,
awesome.
speaking of gaps in our... not just yours, but both of our reading in the fantasy genre.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one might be Nil's other recommendation, which was John Gwynn's work.
Yeah.
So that's The Faithful and the Fallen is some of John Gwynn's work. And then coming up now is The Shadow of the Gods. That one I have been hearing. The buzz around just John Gwynn's work in general and this upcoming book, The Shadow of the Gods, is amazing.
Really
and I hear such incredible things from so many folks that have taste I think lines up well with my own, and everyone keeps saying that they think we'll both enjoy it and that kind of stuff. So I cannot wait, because, Charles, we will be reading The Shadow of the Gods in May when it releases, which is now like a month away, which is so weird to... Yeah, I think we're literally recording this like a month, it might be a month before the day it releases. I could be wrong about that, but it releases in May. Yeah, and it's less than a month away, I would imagine, by the time you are hearing this, dear listener. So I can't wait. Thank you for the rec, Nils. And Nils is one of the folks who wrote an amazing review about this, about John Gwynn's The Shadow of the Gods, that has me excited. So
awesome. Yeah,
yes.
I'm excited. I've been excited. The cover alone is epic, and then all the buzz for months now, the buzz that we've seen pop up about it has can't wait to get into it in May. So here hopefully, maybe will it be as sad as his previous work? Who knows? Here's hoping.
Well,
if that's what he intends
by
to
this
be
point
sad.
I think by this point Nils had read
okay, good.
Already.
Okay, good. good.
drawing from.
Oh,
that as well.
exciting! So we can come back and revisit this after we.
Oh
read it
yeah,
in a few
hopefully you'll
months.
be crying a month from now, Charles.
Here's hoping.
So, yeah, let's make sure that we grab the next recommendation, which is from Kate Hutchison at Hutchison Cat, and that is 1,000-Year-Old Ghosts by Laura Chow. Sorry, Laura Chow Reeve, or Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang.
Hmm.
Do either of these ring a bell to you, Charles?
No, I've never.
Are
This
you
is
crying
this has
right
been an
now?
interested.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of scary, 1,000-year-old ghosts, but I will. It's interesting. This has been an interesting recommendation series because people are pulling out some really interesting works, and a lot of these I've never heard of before. And these are two, 1,000-year-old ghosts and Story of Your Life, neither of which I've heard of before.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Story of Your Life rang a bell for me as like that's a thing I've heard of at some point. But
It's a
yeah, it
novella.
does not. Yeah, and it's from Tor, and it so in
Science
this,
fiction.
So yeah, and it is a science fiction novella. It was first published in 1998, and it was originally published, it looks like, as a short story, and it was nominated for the 1999 Hugo Award for Best Novella. So this is like serious acclaimed stuff. It just predates kind of our. We were pretty young at that point, Charles, even
Yeah.
you, and
Okay. We're your part.
And-
in age.
and yeah, so I guess we just weren't involved in the genre or community yet at that age, and I was probably like 6 or 7. So yeah, but this is stuff that I think is definitely worth a read, and novella is always appealing, I think, because it's quick. So
For sure. Oh, that's awesome. Both of these seem really interesting. So, and they're both novellas, short stories. So these are things we could pick up relatively soon, which is exciting. So yeah, thank you for the Rex. That's great.
yeah. So let's keep it rolling. We've got another endorsement for House in the Cerulean Sea from Rogier the City Beautiful at Rocapri. And they also mentioned Song of Achilles. So, Charles, either of those ringing a bell or making
House
you
of
cry
Cerulean
from just-
Sea rings a bell from earlier in
Yes,
this
well,
episode, but before
that's fair.
today, no. And then Song of Achilles, I've never heard of either. So this has
Yes.
been. I got some Googling to do.
So, Song of Achilles is a New York Times bestseller, Charles.
Okay.
And so
nice.
the part of the pitch here is a thrilling, profoundly moving, and utterly unique retelling of the legend of Achilles and the Trojan War from the best-selling author of Cirque, and that's Madeline Miller.
Hmm.
And so that's a big pop. I really didn't know a lot about it either. So, but New York Times bestseller.
New York Times bestseller. How
Yeah.
could you not give it a shot?
Right.
That's awesome. This is
Oh,
good.
and speaking of, probably worth mentioning the author of it's the House in the Cerulean Sea, I think. And I don't know if I've been saying of, but the House in the Cerulean Sea is also a New York Times, USA Today, and Washington Post bestseller, and that was published in March, and a 2021 Alex Award winner. It's all these things, and an Indie Next Pick, and it's by T.J. Klune. So that's like,
Yeah, I mean,
we're
pitching
getting some real amazing recs here.
These are some impressive cuts, and that's just to go back to say, if a book's making you cry, it's such a huge accomplishment, so not easy to do. It's no surprise to me that so many of these
Well,
are
harder
padded
for
with all
some than
kinds of
others.
awards. Yeah, that may be true, but yeah, I was going to say it's no surprise that a lot of these we've looked up of like, oh, they've won all kinds of awards, nominated for all kinds of awards, and this has been a really interesting list of books, quite an eclectic collection. I'm excited to pick at some of these from my TBR list.
For sure. And when you're talking about eclectic collections, you've definitely got one
Nice.
in David S's 11 book slash series that made him cry, which that's David S on Twitter at Book Meanderings, and an awesome dude who was a huge part of like welcoming us into the community for sure, that we're super grateful for, and definitely enjoy continuing to interact with. And he's over at fanfiaddict.com and just doing awesome stuff like this list, which Charles will put in the liner notes, right, Charles?
Sure, yeah.
Is that even what it's called? The liner notes?
It's just the description.
I don't know why I said, yeah. The episode description.
Yeah.
Yes. But David S.'s work is awesome, and he's just a super nice dude, and we're always happy when he stops by, and this time he stopped by to post that awesome list. And I looked through that list, Charles, and something that there's a lot of great stuff on there, but one of the things that stuck out on there is something that I feel like would be relatively easy to get you to pin you down and get you to read. You know, this is book recommendations to make Charles cry, and we want to actually hashtag mission make Charles cry. We want to make you cry. So this is During the Dance by friend of the show, Mark Lawrence, who
yes.
I know you love his work.
I'm interested.
another awesome person who helped welcome us into the community on Twitter for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a freely available short story.
Mm-hmm.
And which by the way, maybe another thing to put in those wonderful episode description notes, Charles. And that one, so I read that because it's only 2,000 words, it's very quick, and that one I literally at some point was just on Twitter, and Mark Lawrence tweeted how long he estimated it takes to read it and that it was free, and I just like opened it on my phone and read it like in like spur of the moment, and that one did get me to cry. So
wow.
And it's always, kind of like the Paper Menagerie in the sense of being able to just hit you so quick is very impressive, like hit you in the feels so quick.
Yeah.
And Mark Lawrence, this is something I said to him right after that I was amazed, and it continues to show how much, I guess it's like, I'm trying to remember the word that I use, but his range is, I think, the word I use. Like his range as an author, because you would not, when you read this, Charles, if you didn't know it was Mark Lawrence, you would not be like, oh, it must be the author of Prince of Thorns. It's very, very different,
awesome.
But it's incredible and hit me right in the feels. So Charles, what do you think? Can I get you to read During the Dance by friend of the show, Mark Lawrence?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a slam dunk. Friend of the show, Mark Lawrence, of course. And then I clicked the link, and it is so short, guys. It's one of those things where it's like, if you've got a few moments on your phone, just give it a chance. And I'm curious to see the range of Mark Lawrence. I've read 2 series from him. I thought they were fantastic, and he did a lot to welcome us to the community on Twitter, like you said. So I've got the time to read a short story, and like you said, it's not a mission make Charles cry if I don't actually read any of these things. So
it would just be a poor mission, a failed mission.
Yeah, it would. So yeah, seems like a better place to start than any other. So why not?
Well, yeah, you're already in Murderbot, so that one.
That's
no
true.
Choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely an easy one that I thought we could get you on board for. So Charles, we'll continue to monitor that developing situation.
Thank you. Yes, we will continue to monitor it, see where it goes. But very promising. Very promising.
Yep. All right. Well, let's keep it rolling,
along.
and thank you to David for that awesome, for the whole list, which I highly recommend everyone check out that one. Then we had an author stop by in Nick Martell. That's the author of The Legacy of the Mercenary King, which is Kingdom of Liars and the Two-Faced Queen, and that's at Mac Martell. And Nick said anything Robin Hobb has written about Fitz. I think those books are designed to break hearts. And here's the thing, Charles. I've read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and I haven't read anything else yet. I do not think Assassin's Apprentice got me to cry.
No.
And the interesting thing here, Charles, we had a kind of role reversal with this one, where this was one that you approached me after reading the whole trilogy years ago, the whole Farseer trilogy. There's plenty more out there about Fitz.
The initial Farseer trilogy, yeah.
Yes. And you were telling me how you thought, like, I would really enjoy finishing the series because of how it explores, like, relationships and really hit you in the feels. It hit you in the feels, that trilogy. You didn't cry, but
Nick Martell, this is a fantastic recommendation. I did not cry, but it was very emotional, and it wasn't from the first book. You have to read the trilogy, because the way this trilogy ends, and I mentioned this on our Friends Pitching Fantasy episode where I did pitch this to you to read on the show, because I feel like now's the time, after we've read King Killer and maybe now that we've read Earthsea, that we can revisit Robin Hobb and the Farseer trilogy and see how these kind of similar themes about relationship and the individual, and like this idea of themes about the self as opposed to themes of like sprawling warfaring environments, politics and things, and how putting in more of a dedicated introspective approach works, and how it pays off with Robin Hobb is you are just so emotionally invested in this character. You have such an intimate understanding of Fitz by the end of this, that when this book does like end, you close the back cover and you're just like, whoa. Like I remember where I was when I finished this book, because it did impact me. I was on the Long Island Railroad coming back from Manhattan, going to Long Island on my commute home from work, and I was like, this is an inappropriate place for me to be feeling these kinds of things, but at least I have the opportunity to sit with
Charles,
it and process
it's never inappropriate. Maybe that's why you didn't cry.
It's like your diner story where you're like, I'm doing this in a diner, and then I was
the
like,
difference though, Charles, is I just started crying in a diner.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would have cried, but it was more impactful, right? Where you have to exhale and think about it for a second, because you're like, wow, what an accomplishment, and like what a way to end this trilogy, and it leaves you a lot to think about. So yeah, great series, and I'm really curious to have you, Dylan, revisit it and finish the trilogy just for those reasons. And I think Nick Martell is tying into those emotional things really well. I haven't read anything else. I know there's a lot of Fitz and the Fool stories that go on from that trilogy. I haven't read those, but I can only imagine what they can be like based on what I've read, and it's a really great recommendation.
Yeah, I think so too. This is an interesting series. I'll get into more in depth probably at some point, like my history with it, but it's one that I am probably like most excited to revisit of maybe anything I can think of. So can't wait. Great rec. Let's keep it rolling. We have another one of our friends over on Twitter. This is Eleni, and that's Eleni, the Twitter handle. Sorry, I'm losing my place on the sheet right now. The Twitter handle for Eleni is at Eleni Argiro, and Eleni, she's involved on a lot of like blogs and stuff that are great to check out. One of them is the Late Night Books, and that's latenightbooks.com. latenightbookscom.wordpress.com, and she has awesome stuff over there, and she also does awesome stuff on Before We Go blog, which is a Beth Tabler's blog. That's at Beth Tabler, and that's also a blog where I recently joined the team.
Nice.
Yeah, Before We Go blog. I've not written anything yet, but Beth has been very great and cordial in and patient, probably most of all, in terms of me actually writing content for her blog. But that's the plan. And let's not let me try to steal the spotlight from Eleni, who's got a recommendation to try to make Charles cry, and that's what this is all about. And Eleni said, I was definitely tearing up by the end of the Greatcoats tetralogy. And we've talked about Greatcoats on here before, Charles. Did you remember that?
No. When did we talk about it?
We talked about it, I believe, as it was in one of our recommendations episodes.
Okay.
And the way that it's come off to me, it's kind of this like I haven't read it, if that wasn't clear already. It's a swashbuckling, roguish type story that gets compared a lot to a series that you have quite a bit of history with, despite not reading it, which is the Lies or the Gentleman Bastard sequence, beginning with Lies Lamora. Greatcoats. The author is Sebastian de Castell, and it begins with Traitor's Blade, and it's kind of this like I've had exchanges with Elaine about this. It's like, if you're a fan of something like Pirates of the Caribbean and the like Captain Jack Sparrow type and this witty dialogue and things like that, then you'll get recommendations for this series. And what was interesting to me here is like, because I hadn't read it, I never thought of it as a book that like hits you in the feels, because I thought of it more as this like witty banter, roguish shtick. So it's interesting to see it's got both sides to it.
Yeah, no, it seems really interesting. I'm looking at it now. I do remember the covers now that I see them, and the author's name rings a bell, Sebastian de Castell. How can you go wrong? A swashbuckling adventure? Like, come on, sign me up.
Yeah. Are you signing up, Charles?
I don't know if I'm ready for what is it called? A tetralogy? But it's on the TBR. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I think there would be probably a revolt on Twitter if you read this one before reading, just because it gets compared to like the Lies of Lamora a lot. It'd be like, wait, Charles is reading the thing everyone says is like the Gentleman Bastard series, and he's still not reading Gentleman Bastard. So I think you're excused here, Charles.
For sure. And I mean, when it starts coming up multiple times in these recommendation series, you have to start taking note of it as well. So it's like, okay, well,
yeah,
it's creeping up the TBR just for those reasons.
Yeah, I think it was the Kingkiller Chronicle rec.
Kingkiller Chronicle rec and Mission Make Charles Cry rec.
And like, Mission Make Charles Cry.
How can you not? How does that not have you interested already just from that?
And on the topic of the Kingkiller Chronicle and Mission Make Charles Cry, we have a recommendation from Fantology. Fantology podcast. You've probably heard us have conversations with them if you've listened to those episodes, or at least talk about them. They're a fantastic podcast that do all sorts of bookish, mostly fantasy content. That's at Fantology_books. And this almost definitely came from Steven, because that's where the tweets come from, for the most part, from the Fantology podcast Twitter account. And he said, I can think of two big crying moments for me in my reading history. One in Wise Man's Fear, the Kingkiller Chronicle, by Patrick Rothfuss, when Quoth is on the rooftops and reflecting about his parents. And one at the end of Rhythm of War, which is Stormlight Archive again. And he said, you know the part, which I had to clarify, no, because that's the one book I haven't read yet in the Stormlight Archive, because it came out right before.
People who have read it will probably know the part.
Yes, they'll know the part, I'm sure. Which makes me pumped to get to Rhythm of War. That one's kind of one that I would have jumped right on if we weren't doing FTF at the time, and it's changed kind of my reading schedule and stuff like that. But yeah, can't wait to get to book 4 of the Stormlight Archive. And then Wise Man's Fear, that moment is definitely, I won't get into details, and Stephen did a great job of not saying spoilers while making the parts clear. And yeah, Charles, we've read the Kingkiller Chronicle. We love the Kingkiller Chronicle.
We love the
Kingkiller Chronicle. I cry at the Kingkiller Chronicle. What happens to you, Charles? I cry just like when Denna's getting back on the page during my reread. I'm like, oh no,
Oh,
here
God.
it comes.
Yeah,
Like, no, it's right away.
No,
I talk about.
I've
Yeah.
read
What about you,
Name
Charles?
of the Wind and Wise Man's Fear. I love them.
And Slow Regard.
And Slow Regard. I read that too. We've dedicated a lot of hours to talking about Patrick
Mostly
Rothfuss's
Denna.
work. Yeah, a lot of it's involving Denna, but I've never even come close to crying reading
no.
this series, and that's not a bad thing. It just doesn't like I love these books, but it just doesn't hit me that way. I'm just so interested in the story and Quoth as a character and the way it's narrated and all these other things. Its place in the fantasy world, just like from a meta perspective. Like I'm so invested in all these things and Patrick's incredible writing, but it's never moved me to tears. And I wonder if that is a unique experience. Like I didn't even think that it was just a book that makes people move to tears. But between you and Phantology, maybe it is. I don't know.
And yeah, it's like, well, this is another thing that I see a little bit more of by being out there on the social media accounts and stuff.
Yeah.
I could see why you would read it, and if it didn't affect you in that way, you'd think, oh, like, why? I mean, you do hear me. I mean, you've heard we had our name and win discussion, all this kind of stuff. How many times have I said like, "Oh, I got choked up as soon as Denna got back on the"?
Yeah,
it's
but
like
I wasn't
that
sure
kind of
if
stuff.
that's
But
because it spoke to
if
you
that's just
so
me.
directly, like if you had such a connection to it, and like I never thought that was like something to expect from most readers that they'd be able
oh
to.
no, this is like when King Killer Chronicle gets brought up in a lot of at least the exchanges I have in the community with a lot of folks, people like David S would be in the mix on that. It's like that crying emoji just starts coming out. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like everyone's just like, they'll like say a quote and then it'll just be like 3 of those crying emojis. And yeah, that's like I would say the rep that it has is a book that definitely hits you in the feels. So yep, another book that and Steven's basically like there's 2 big crying moments. So and he doesn't from our interaction with Steven, he doesn't seem like he's like the person who's always bawling at all these different books. And I got the sense from this comment too that it's like, he'll cry if something hits him really hard, and these 2 did. And it's telling that one is the Kingkiller Chronicle.
And Stormlight, not the first time that it's appeared in this episode today. So between I'm so excited to read Stormlight, and I love Kingkiller so much. So those Phantology, those are 2 titan recommendations, I'd say. They didn't make me cry, so better luck next time. But
well, we'll see with Stormlight.
We'll see with Stormlight. Yeah, that's
you're getting
this
again. These
I've never cried
awesome
reading
folks.
Sanderson before, but he's so talented in the way you've described it as his best work yet. Like, I am open to it, and I'm thinking that this is a strong possibility. So
let's hope.
It's exciting. We can only hope. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, a series that you certainly have read, Charles, is going to come up in this next recommendation from Courtney W. at Livin' the Lib Life.
Nice.
And that is the final book in R.F. Kuang's Poppy War trilogy destroyed me. The entire series has moments, but the finale definitely takes the meaning very, I think here, brutal cake. And I would definitely agree that it takes the very brutal cake.
Yes.
And there's another part to Zarek, Charles, that's going to open a whole can of worms. So let's just start by talking about the Poppy War
let's
a little
address
bit.
R.F. Kuang's Poppy War, because we have processed these already. we actually have done our own buddy read of the Poppy War trilogy where we talked about it, and we also were guests on Phantology's podcast for the final book, The Burning God, in R.F. Kuang's Poppy War trilogy. And okay, you'll notice that in Phantology's 2 crying moments, one of them was not from the Poppy War trilogy.
Here we go,
and
Charles.
That's because we had this discussion of like it was, I think everyone agrees, taking the very brutal cake.
Everyone on. Oh, yes, go on.
So taking the very brutal cake is accurate, but there's this difference between like this emotional connection and then this like very brutal connection, and a lot of R.F. Kuang's fans, she dedicated that last book to her fans and mentioned the Bucket of Tears, which is famous. So this is a very solid recommendation. But Dylan, I don't want to speak for you, but when we did talk about the ending of this trilogy and just about all these moments throughout the Poppy War trilogy that's famous for these Bucket of Tears moments, we were like, we weren't crying because it's more of this, like, it's heartbreaking, but it's not emotional. Like, it's not like depressing emotional response.
For us, it was not.
Right.
I think it would be. It's clearly a series that has made lots and lots of people absolutely bawl.
Yeah.
And I've seen videos. I've seen, people are posting this stuff out there. It's, I guess for me, I think the thing. So yeah, I've said many times probably already on here, things have made me cry, and the Poppy War trilogy, despite being famous for this, like, RF or Rebecca Kuang says, "Bring your bucket for your tears." It didn't elicit that kind of reaction for me. I thought it's one of my favorite series ever. It is incredible. Rin as a protagonist is I think one of the most compelling and interesting characters for me that I have ever read. And we won't talk about what the actual events of the ending, that, you can hear us talk about that in multiple podcasts, like, on Fantology, on our own.
Spoilerly glory.
Yes.
You can go and check those out.
For sure. And for me, there was just something that didn't hit me in the feels to the same extent, despite me being like, as an ending to a series, this is extremely satisfying and powerful. That's
well said. So it is a powerful ending, and it was just a different kind of emotional response for us.
Yes.
And great recommendation, though, especially
Fantastic.
when you're talking about series famous for making people cry, for sure. So highly recommend R.F. Kuang's Poppy War. But did it mission make Charles cry? No, but it was a great rec, and I love that book. So,
well, Courtney has another great rec, Charles.
Oh, yes.
And
I see
that.
I see it on the notes.
Yes. That rec has to do with a whole nother mission centered around you, Charles, that many folks are on. And that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. And the mission that a lot of folks are on is to get you to read this series that I've pitched to you twice already in separate fans pitching fantasy episodes. But Courtney says The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch was an unexpected gut punch. Had no clue what I was getting myself into, and then suddenly. And just cut off, which is great voice, by the way. Like, yeah. That's a great tweet, just to say, and then suddenly. But yes, we've talked a lot about The Lies of Locke Lamora, more than any book we've never read. I've read, to make that clear. More than any book that we have not read on the podcast, I would say we've talked about Lies of Locke Lamora.
That's fair.
I see what Courtney is getting at here. I know exactly the moment, and I won't say any more.
Yeah.
Great book. Read it.
Great book.
Everyone.
And I want to make it clear
Charles.
the reason we haven't read it is because he pitched it against Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles, and then he pitched it against Joe Abercrombie with Wisdom of Crowds coming out this year.
Did I?
Yes, you did.
I thought I pitched it. No, I thought I pitched it. I did with the Kingkiller Chronicle. I thought I pitched it. I thought I pitched it with, I can't remember the third book, but I think it was, here's what I think. I think it was Red Sister by friend of the show, Mark Lawrence. I think it was then, of course, The Gentleman Bastard sequence by Scott Lynch. And I also think that I did The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. That would be my guess. I could be wrong, but that's how I remember it.
Oh, man. Now we're going to have to go back and check because I thought for sure the only reason I didn't pick it was because I wanted to read Joe Abercrombie again. So
I don't think that was... Yeah. I could be wrong.
Okay, well,
We'll check.
my memory is different from yours, but
That happens.
anyway, it's Dylan's fault. That's the whole point,
Okay,
is what I'm trying
that's
to
the
get
point.
to on this, and that's because you've given me some really tough choices in Friends Pitching Fantasy, but it is at the top of my TBR. I think if I were to not pick it again, I could not show my face on Twitter. So
You barely do that anyway. Let's be
I
honest.
barely do it anyway, but this time it would be like for real. I just have to
delete your account.
Yeah, just have to not go and read the comments of the Friends Talking Fantasy page. But yeah, that's a great rec. That's come up on almost every single recommendations episode that we've recorded. So, it's at the top of my TBR for sure.
Yeah.
So,
And Charles, it is also my fault that you didn't read it for your decade of fantasy reading before we start a podcast, right?
I'm glad you were big enough to admit that, Dylan. Thank you.
We're not sure why that's the case, but it must be, because it is my fault, I guess.
No, Dylan,
So-
okay, you recommended The Blade Itself, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet,
You're saying
and
I
Lies of
pitched?
Locke Lamora.
Okay,
You
okay,
pitched those
yeah.
three.
That's okay. You got it.
So
I believe
give
you.
me a break here. What am I
Well,
supposed to
what?
do?
You wouldn't get a break? I mean, if you chose friend of the show Mark Lawrence's Book of the Ancestor, that is excusable too. I mean, that's an incredible series. So I pick three great series. What can I say? And
Yeah, but the whole thing
I
was the
think that-
timely release of the newest book in that
Okay.
universe. Was like
you're saying in Joe Abercrombie's Age of Madness?
yeah,
Is what you're
exactly.
saying. Okay. Well, let's no further ado. We always get derailed when
I was
when
right though for the
Gentleman
record.
Past
You
Viewer.
pitched
I
Red
believe
Sister,
you.
Murderbot, and Kings of the Wild was when you pitched Red Sister.
Oh. Yeah.
And not
another
picking
three
King
great
of the
series.
Wild or Murderbot were also two really tough things too. But we're trying to make amends. We're getting through those. We're reading Murderbot now.
Yeah.
It's and then I've got Kings of the Wild on the top of my TBR as well. So we're getting through them all. We'll get there.
We'll get through all of them. Yeah, Charles, I'm gonna make you pay during our next Friends Pitching Fantasy too. I think.
I've already begged you not to.
Well, this is. Okay. Well, let's keep it rolling.
Let's keep it rolling.
I've got a lot more
we
to
got
say.
a lot of
but-
recs here.
Right. All right. So we've got another recommendation for John Gwynn's Faithful and the Fallen, which is from Bags at Bag On with two N's. And Bags said, Faithful and the Fallen, John Gwynn crushes my soul. And we actually had John Gwynn himself
Wow, yeah,
stop
this was
by on the
amazing.
Twitter thread. That's at John Gwynn _ and John Gwynn had a very concise and well-written tweet, which was right after hearing that his book had crushed poor Bags' soul. John Gwynn said, "This makes me happy."
So
love
that
it.
is awesome. I love it. And you guys just have to put this in perspective here. This whole thing is a recommendation. It's for me specifically. Mission Make Charles Cry. Right? Everyone is sharing these moments where they've read these books or watched these movies where they have been incredibly vulnerable, right? All these award-winning things. And then you have John Gwynn coming in talking about how happy he is that this book has crushed someone's soul on a thread of people trying to make me cry. It's a bizarre feeling. I feel like I have to, how can you not respond to something like that? It's incredible. It's like, I guess I have to really, I'm so excited for May to read Shadow of the Gods. Such a crazy experience. I don't know what to say. It's wild.
Yeah, no, it's definitely another one of those moments that is, very. It's surreal and it's like the internet. It's just the wackiness of the internet. It's like you tag John Gwynn, an author that you see his work all the time in bookstores, and then he just shows up and says something. It's wacky and yeah, so it's cool.
Thank you, John Gwynn, for stopping by.
Thank
you, Bags at Bag On, for the recommendation. John Gwynn, the second time he's come up, and we will be reading Shadow of Gods in May. Highly looking forward to it.
Yes, that's it. Oh, and by the way, I want to make sure that I thank the folks who retweeted and or quote tweeted. By the way, even if they didn't make Rex, so one of the best ways to contribute and help us is retweeting and quote tweeting. So let me give those shout outs before we get to the rest of these, which is shout out to the Medjay of Phajum, book blogger / reviewer at MataWorld12, and shout out to Run Along Womble. That's at Run Along Womble. So thank y'all, and we'll keep this rolling here.
Let's do it. So the next review that's come up is from a book that we just mentioned, Kings of the Wild. And this was recommended by Logan F. Goodner at Logan Goodner 7. And Dylan, you've read Kings of the Wild. What do you have to say about these sneaky cry moments that Logan is hinting at?
Yes. I like to say humorous and heartfelt in equal measure around Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames.
Well,
and that is pretty much what's happening here. I think if this one, I don't think this made me cry, but definitely had these moments of hitting me in the feels. And I think that if it makes you, I basically don't think anything that didn't make me cry is likely to make you cry, Charles, but we'll see. I do think lots of people cry at it, and if you cry, it'll probably be because it's like has you laugh. You could cry from laughter, maybe, Charles. Maybe that might be the best chance. So, yeah, it's like it brings you up with these hilarious moments, and then just hits you hard. It's kind of that dramatic shift that might have a chance. So that's that one, I think.
Okay, great. Well, that's awesome. That's another one where Dylan has to make me choose between some of these crazy series that I would love to read, and I have to not pick two of them, so I'm super excited to read Kings of the Wild at some point. So you guys are touching on some great recs. I'm excited.
Yeah, so many awesome ones. And we've got another awesome contribution from Fantasy Book Nerd. That's at Fantasy Book Nerd, who's another wonderful folk in the community. He does reviews and posts on fantasybooknerd.com. Highly recommend checking that stuff out. And then Fantasy Book Nerd said, "Ooh, hard time with this one because on the whole, I am not a gusher. Made of stone, me, which is very Fantasy Book Nerd's voice. Yeah. FBN, as I like to call Fantasy Book Nerd. And FBN continued, but Call of the Bone Ships is pretty cutting emotional-wise. And this is someone of your own heart, Charles, who doesn't really cry. Made from stone.
I appreciate that qualifier because that's what we need in this hashtag mission make Charles cry. So I'm ready. Thank you for that rec.
No, we need people who have been just somehow broke through their stony exteriors to actually get them to cry if we're going to have any shot here with Charles. Awesome. Do you think that's right, Charles?
I think that's fair. It makes me sound a little cut off emotionally, but you know what? It's mission make Charles cry, and that's just what we're here to do today. And this kind of perspective is necessary if we're going to make this happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that is R.J. Barker, Called the Bone Ships. So for any folks who want to check that one out, and Fantasy Book Nerd is always up to date with a lot of these awesome stuff that Charles and I haven't read that one. Great. So then Jake Bishop came in at Jake Bishop 1 and said, live ship The Sword of Kagan, the second trilogy in Realm of the Elderlings, multiple Malazan books, LST by Robin Hobb, multiple Dresden books, right? Jim Butcher is Dresden, and Steven Erikson is Malazan. The trilogy featuring the Pirate Kennet, multiple Cosmere books, the Farseer trilogy, more Robin Hobb, multiple Wheel of Time books, the Live Ship Traders trilogy. So this is kind of like, I feel like Jake's coming in here with this like, Jake's probably a little bit more like me.
Jake, like a lot of things can only be so long. This is too many. Dresden, Wheel of Time, the Cosmere, Robin Hobb. These are all fantastic recs.
Amazing recs.
Malazan. I mean, it's got my head spinning. It's interesting. I'm curious to see what parts, perhaps, of Wheel of Time or the Cosmere will invoke the most emotion. I have a feeling that with Cosmere, it's going to be a lot of Stormlight stuff, which I'm really excited to get into. Robin Hobb, we've discussed. I highly recommend it for someone looking for an emotional series. And some of these other ones I have not read are in great company, so they have piqued my interest.
Yeah. And Sword of Kagan is in the mix again. So
that's right. Sword of Kagan coming back.
Yeah.
That's true.
All right. Well, Malazan came up in that one, and Malazan came up again from Dark Portents. That's at D Portents. And Dark Portents said, Malazan, if the second book can't make you cry, then nothing will. And Charles, you've read the second book of
most
Malazan.
Of it. I didn't finish it.
Right? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I read the first book, and then I read maybe about half or 3/4 of the second book. That's Deadhouse Gates, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was tragic. Maybe I didn't get to the point that Dark Portents is
Portents.
Portents. Got it. Yeah, their handle's different from their name.
I think that was a typo.
Got it.
In our notes.
In our notes. Got it. So Dark Portents. So yeah, that is, I can't speak to it fully just because I didn't finish it. I love Malazan, but I got this. I think it was before we did the podcast, and then once we started the podcast and Malazan wasn't on our reading schedule, it just kind of got neglected. So one of these days we'll get to reading Malazan, but we just committed to Wheel of Time, so one giant massive series at a time, I think, for us. But that's good to know. Dylan, you've read the second book of Malazan.
Yes.
Do you know the moment that they're speaking of?
I know the moment that they're speaking of, and I'm not gonna lie to you, Charles. This is not one that has made me cry.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is another moment that I see why this makes a lot of people cry, and it certainly has made a lot of people cry. So I get where Dark Portents is coming from. I haven't had the at least a few of the other ones on here have made me cry before, Kingkiller, and I don't know what else we've read on here that did it. Oh, During the Dance and stuff. But this is not one of them for me, and so I don't know. I haven't personally found the if the second book can't make you cry, then nothing will bit here to be true for me. But I see what Dark Portents is getting at, and I think that's a big moment for a lot of folks with Malazan.
Got it. Great.
So,
well, I'm excited to get there with Malazan. That's another big gap in my reading list, is a classic like Malazan. So it's on the list.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got another comment here from @JackClaver Bender, as Jack Claver is known on Twitter, and funny. Jack has a funny voice and great, not like how I have a funny voice when you hear me on the podcast. I mean, voice as a writer of tweets says some funny things and all that. So I always appreciate Bender's contributions. This time Bender went a little more straightforward than some of his tweets, which is Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham, Thomas Covenant by Stephen Donaldson. Brilliant prose, but relentlessly depressing plot. And we had that one backed up by friend of the show, Levi Jacobs, as well. Long Price was the one backed up by Levi Jacobs.
That's awesome.
Daniel Abraham, one of the co-authors under a pseudonym of The Expanse, by the way.
Oh, that's cool. I had actually started Long Price Quartet, but it was so long ago that honestly I can't really speak too much of it, but I've read the first one and I remembered it having its strong moments, but I would have to revisit it to be able to speak on it appropriately. But that one has snuck its way onto a lot of best all-time fantasy series, which is how I believe I picked it up in the first place. It's always this pick of guys, this is a fantastic series. It almost has this either cult following or this underrated kind of following to it, where a lot of people are quick to promote this one, push this one up, and that's how it got on my radar initially. And yeah, it seems really interesting. Dylan, you've not read this, right?
No, I have not. I'm definitely interested. I've seen a lot of really interesting things about it. I saw it on list of like best world building and things like that.
Mm.
So I definitely want to check it out. A lot of people love it, and it's kind of been a almost a sleeper hit. It feels like as
Yeah.
Daniel Abraham has gotten more known under the pseudonym that he writes the Expanse. In part writes the Expanse under. So yeah, that sleeper hit it seems like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll have to check it out one of these days.
Cool. Well, another one that would make a lot of sense to check out one of these days is from at Run Along Womble. That's Run Along Womble. And Run Along Womble, another awesome contributor in the community, and said The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak. And that's one that, that's a famous one. I believe is there a movie of that one, Charles? Would you know that?
There is a movie I want to say. I don't know why though. Maybe not.
Yeah. So
there is.
Yeah, there is.
2013. Okay.
And I think the way I've heard this is, I have a cousin who has read this and recommended it with similar thoughts about like very emotional, total gut punch, and sounds very deep. So one I'd love to check out at some point. Feels more like larger speculative fiction, I think, than like fantasy per se. But that's never stopped us before, Charles.
No, it has not. Oh,
yeah.
Cool. The Book Thief. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's got all these awards I see in a movie, so no surprises there. This has been a really, in terms of like awards, this recommendations list has been one of the most, award-packed recommendations lists we've ever seen. So this is awesome.
Yep. And I think that's probably, the ones that hit you hard in the feels are the ones oftentimes that people are like, these need to win awards. So makes sense. Then we've got a contribution from someone who's always out there with like certain takes for sure. On Twitter, it's at Lord Grumpy Dark.
Lord Grumpy Dark made an appearance?
Yeah, Lord Grumpy Dark
Wow.
swung by.
That's awesome.
Always appreciate Lord Grumpy Dark when he gets the time to stop by and make Rex. I know he's a busy guy. He's working on some like fan fiction of Levi Jacobs' work. I know he's a big Taylor Swift enthusiast and all this kind of stuff. So always nice when he gets the time to stop by.
He's another one that has quite a voice on the Twitter sphere.
Definitely in that writing, I could see the Levi Jacobs inspiration in how he writes his fan fiction that he posts on Twitter. So definitely check out at Lord Grumpy Dark. And Lord Grumpy Dark said, I would recommend that Charles try rereading Daughter of Flood and Fury by Levi Jacobs, tagged I are Levi Jacobs, a couple of times. So not just one reread. You got to reread it multiple times. I know Charles didn't cry on the first read, but the third read through is where I think you really start to appreciate some of the more poignant moments. Reaction, Charles.
I gotta say, this is very on brand for Lord Grumpy Dark. I'm surprised you didn't tell me to like repurchase the book every time I go to read it as well.
It's implied.
He is a very strong proponent of Daughter of Flood and Fury, rightfully so. And who's to say? I think he's more of an expert in the lore of Daughter and Flood and Fury, the Tidecaller Chronicles, than I am. So if he speaks about the Tidecaller Chronicles, then you should be listening because he is one of the authorities. And
that and Taylor Swift.
It also helps to just kind of agree with Lord Grumpy Dark. You don't want to get on his grumpy side. He has tried to march the grumpy army against me a few times, so I'm always kind of afraid to react to what he has to say. But Lord Grumpy Dark, thank you for the rec. I will consider it.
I'm sure he'll appreciate that. Hopefully he listens.
I hope he appreciates it.
Yes.
If he listens to the show, I don't know, but appreciate the rec.
I think he definitely listened to the Daughter of Flood and Fury episode and the Levi Jacobs interview. He's mentioned those to me before. So there's been some times in which Lord Grumpy Dark feels we don't cover Daughter of Fun Fury as in depth as he would like, or mention Taylor Swift enough. Which, by the way, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, Lord Grumpy Dark.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, are you, Charles?
I like Taylor Swift. You're gonna like.
You're not like a deep cut guy. You like know the hits, right?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I guess
I listen to the albums. I'm like serious. Right?
Okay,
I'm sorry. I don't mean to gatekeep. I don't know. That was bad. That was a bad look. That was a bad take. Charles can like Taylor Swift. I don't mean to gatekeep. That was bad.
I'm not listening
sorry.
to the albums, but I appreciate when she comes on the radio. So
That's good, and that makes you a fan too. So then we have a contribution from Pete at Pete Long. That is, Pete said, Ravenheart and Stormire by David Gemmell. I've heard great things about David Gemmell's work. And then the other one is one that might evoke more conversation from us, which is Most Things by Guy Gabriel Kay. And we've both read Tigana, and you've read more of Kay's work than I have.
Yeah, I've read Tigana and I've read Under Heaven. The Lions of Our Son is high up on my TBR list. That's like one of his most popular works. I think he's a terrific author for a whole lot of reasons, but I've never been emotional reading his work. Dylan, did you get emotional reading Tigana?
Yeah. I do think I think I cried at the end of Tigana. I do think I
Oh.
did. I'm trying to remember, and that was kind of my react. I read it well later than you did, Charles, and I was really into the ending, if you remember.
Yeah.
And that is because it hit me really hard in the feels. It's like, it's been long enough where I'm like, do I remember the moment of sitting there crying? I don't know. I think I did. And yeah, I think that Kay has a way of capturing like a mood is what I think. And the mood and the feel by the end of Tigana just had me it hit me in the feels and didn't let me go is kind of how I feel about it. And I think that Kay's work is a great recommendation here, and we know Pete's far from alone in that recommendation, Charles, because Tony the Fong himself,
Wow.
Charles, the creator of hashtag Mission Make Charles Cry, the Fong of Emberlane, which is, by the way, a Liza Laclamore reference,
Oh boy.
said, I haven't read any Guy Gabriel Kay yet, but I hear that a lot about his books. I have Tigana and Under Heaven on the shelf just
Hey.
for whenever the mood strikes to get into GGK. And that is, well, I guess, Tony the Fong hasn't yet read Guy Gabriel Kay, but when it's captured Tony's interest that this is a series that you want to
Yeah, and
you
all
wanna
the
check
books
out.
by Guy
Or
Gabriel
not
Kay that he
series,
could have
but-
picked. He picked Tigana and Under Heaven, the two of which
are
I'm
two you've
most
read.
familiar with. Yeah, those are great
Yeah.
places to start. And Dylan, you had pitched Tigana for the show, and
I did.
that one I did not choose, but we had both read it,
No.
so I feel like we can speak to it. And yeah, great series. Lots of great reasons to read Guy Gabriel Kay. Tony the Fong. I don't want to just call you Tony, but the Fong of Emberlane. I will say, I hope the mood strikes you soon and that you pick these up because you won't be disappointed. They're really, really interesting, thoughtful books that I would love to have like a buddy read discussion on someday soon.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of depth to those books for sure, and I can just tell it'd be one of those kind of like we just had our A Wizard of Earthsea conversation, and you and I kind of as we were going, it was just more and more like there's so much here.
Yeah.
I think that Guy Gabriel Kay's work is kind of like that. Like
Yes.
there's just a lot to explore and discuss. So yeah, and Tony, do you not like Charles calling you by just your first name? Do you want to be addressed by your full name, Tony the Fong? Let us know if you're listening. So
that would, yeah. I mean, he's Tony the Fong of Emberlane. If you want to go his
Yes.
full title, just let me
Yes.
know. And if we're on a first name basis of Tony, that's cool too. But yeah, let us know. But for now, thank you for starting this hashtag and inspiring us to record this episode. So many just highly praised, award-winning books here. The TBR gets ever longer, but we have some that have worked their way up the shortlist, some that have been recommended a few times now that I'm paying attention to, of series to identify for our next Friends Pitching Fantasy. So guys, thank you so much for all of these recommendations. Thank you for all your support in making me cry. I'm not a complete monster, and I hope one of these series will prove that. So thank you.
Ooh, he wants to cry now, which is like, maybe that's the first step. Is like, I was saying to Charles off the air, I was like, at this point, the incentives are there where Charles would rather cry than not cry because he doesn't want to be perceived. I don't think you're a monster, Charles.
I appreciate you
know
saying
you're
that.
kind of this narrative is you're worried about spiraling out of control. Charles is a nice person, everyone. Charles is probably capable of crying. I've
cried plenty of times in my personal life, just not in the context of reading a fantasy novel. So that's what we're here to do.
No, Charles is a great dude. And,
thank you, sir.
You're there's been some thanks. There's been some speculation. Maybe his tear ducts just don't work properly. Tony the Fong was saying maybe that's the issue here. Because if tears went into your eyes for the Paper Menagerie and they just didn't leave your eyes,
that's fair.
Maybe that's what's happening.
Tony, that's
maybe you should see a doctor.
Maybe I should. I think that's all part of the mission. No, if I read some of these on this list and I still haven't cried, then maybe I should get my eyes checked because, I mean, how could you not? So many great series here. And, if you've read some of these or you're inspired to read some of these, let us know because I think these are such great recs. We don't have time to read them all, so it's always valuable to hear other people's perspectives and experiences reading these. And, who knows? Sometimes if it hits us the right way, it moves up the TBR. So reach out to us. Let us know what has made you cry and what of these series has stuck out because I want to know. I now have a personal mission here I'm personally invested in this, so you gotta let us know.
Yeah, definitely. You can throw that on our Instagram or Twitter post.
That's right.
Yeah, when we post this episode and. I think we've gotten through the recommendations. Sorry to anyone that we did, we do our best to get everyone, but sorry if we missed you. But I think we covered a lot here.
We got a lot
good
of them.
About this.
I feel pretty good. If we missed you, apologies, but there's always more. And I think as we get into that sweet, sweet outro music, Dylan, if you think we're ready, we can tell them exactly how to do that.
I think I'm ready to get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everybody, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to discuss some of these really tear-jerking books, then that's great. I really need to hear your recommendations, guys. I know I'm probably going to be popping in and out of Twitter for this one because I've got a personal stake here, and I want to know what everyone thinks. And that's over on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook at the FTF Podcast. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they wanted to support the show, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just click on the Friends Talking Fantasy page on that Apple Podcast app. Scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have some extra time, writing a review can be even more helpful. But just listening is more than enough. We really appreciate you. And thanks for coming out to help on hashtag Mission Make Charles Cry.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I greatly appreciate it. Very touching. Always appreciate the Rex. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.